James Thompson was a hard-working farmer, 45 years old with strong hands that knew every inch of his 10-acre farm in Sussex. For 5 years, he had been waking up before the sun rose, just as his father and grandfather had done before him. This morning, like every Saturday morning, he loaded his truck carefully with fresh organic vegetables. Each carrot, each potato, each head of lettuce was grown with love and care on his small farm. The drive to Brighton Farmers Market took an hour, but James never minded. He loved seeing the town wake up, watching the shopkeepers open their doors, and the early morning joggers pass by. The market had become special to him over the years. It was more than just a place to sell his vegetables. It was where he made friends, where people knew his name, where he felt like he belonged. As James parked his truck in the usual spot, he could see the other vendors setting up their stalls. There was old Henry with his cheese, Mary with her homemade jams, and Peter with his fresh flowers. They all waved and smiled at him as he started unloading his crates. This was his community, his family away from home. James was arranging his ripe tomatoes when he saw Margaret, the market manager, walking quickly toward him. Her face looked different today, not the friendly smile he was used to seeing. His stomach felt a little nervous, but he smiled anyway. "Good morning, Margaret," he said cheerfully. "Beautiful day for market, isn't it?" Margaret stopped in front of his stall. She did not smile back. "James," she said in a cold voice that made him shiver, "we've decided to change our vendor policy. You'll need to leave." James felt like someone had punched him in the stomach. He looked at her, confused. "Leave? But why? I've been selling here for 5 years. My vegetables are always fresh. My customers are always happy." "The policy has changed," Margaret repeated. She would not look him in the eye. James looked around the market. Thomas was setting up his bread stall. Susan was arranging her eggs. William was unpacking his herbs. Every single vendor was white. Only James was black. And only James was being asked to leave. His hands began to shake as he realized what was happening. This wasn't about vendor policies. This was about the color of his skin. After 5 years of friendship, of sharing laughs, and stories of helping each other on slow days, this was how it ended. "But my vegetables," James started to say, his voice catching in his throat. "You need to pack up and leave," Margaret interrupted. "Now." James looked at the beautiful vegetables he had picked just hours ago, the red tomatoes that had taken months to grow, the green beans he had harvested by hand, the potatoes still covered in good English soil. Each one represented hours of work, dreams of success, hope for the future. Emily Williams, who had been buying his vegetables every week for 3 years, was watching. She stepped forward. "James grows the best tomatoes in town," she said to Margaret. "Why are you making him leave?" Robert Mitchell, another regular customer, stood beside Emily. "He's the most honest vendor here. His prices are always fair." Other customers gathered around, confused by what was happening. They had come to buy James's vegetables, to see his friendly smile, to hear his stories about the farm. Margaret turned away from everyone. "This is market business," she said sharply. "James, you have 30 minutes to pack up." James's heart felt heavy as an old stone. His dream of being a successful farmer, of making his family proud, of earning respect through hard work, it all seemed to crumble in that moment. He had faced many challenges as a black farmer, but he had always believed that if he worked hard enough, people would see past the color of his skin. With shaking hands, James began to pack his vegetables back into crates, the tomatoes that he had hoped would become someone's lunch, the carrots that children loved to crunch on, the lettuce that would have made fresh salads. One by one, he put them away. Emily and Robert helped him load the truck, their faces sad and angry. Other customers watched silently. Some shook their heads, some whispered to each other, but no one could stop what was happening. As James climbed into his truck, he looked back at the market one last time, this place that had been his second home, these people who had been his friends. His heart ached with a pain that went deeper than just losing a place to sell vegetables. The drive home was the longest hour of his life. The truck was full of vegetables, but his heart was empty of hope. As he pulled into his farm driveway, he wondered how he would tell his wife, Emma, how he would explain to his children, Lucy and Thomas, why their father was no longer welcome. At the market. The sun was fully up now, shining on his fields where his vegetables still grew, but James felt no joy in its warmth. He sat in his truck for a long time, his head bowed, tears he had fought so hard to hold back finally falling down his cheeks. This farm, this land his grandfather had dreamed of owning, suddenly felt very lonely. The end. The sun was setting behind the old oak trees when James finally drove up to his farmhouse. Emma was in the kitchen making something warm for the children to eat after school. She heard the truck arrive much earlier than usual and knew something was wrong. Through the window she could see James sitting quietly in the driver's seat, not moving. 5-year-old Thomas was playing with his toy cars on the living room floor when James walked in. 12-year-old Lucy was doing her homework at the kitchen table. Both children looked up when their father entered the room and immediately noticed his face looked tired and sad. Emma put down the wooden spoon she was using to stir the soup and walked to her husband. She could tell from his eyes that something terrible had happened. "James," she said softly, taking his hand. "What's wrong?" James looked at his family, his beautiful wife with her caring smile, his smart daughter who loved to read, his playful son who wanted to be a farmer just like his dad. How could he tell them what happened? How could he explain that the place he went every week, where people smiled and waved at him, had thrown him out because of his skin color? "Come sit down," Emma said gently, leading him to the kitchen table. "Lucy, please put on some tea for your father. Thomas, finish with your cars and come join us." Soon the whole family was sitting together around the wooden table that Emma's grandmother had given them. The warm smell of soup filled the room, and the gentle sound of the tea kettle whistling made the kitchen feel safe and peaceful. But James still couldn't find the right words. Lucy noticed her father's hands, usually strong and steady from farm work, were shaking slightly around his teacup. "Dad," she asked softly, "what happened at the market today?" James looked at his young daughter. She had his same determined spirit. When she was little, she would spend hours in the vegetable garden with him, asking questions about every plant, every insect, every trick to make things grow. She understood hard work because she had watched him every day since she could remember. "Sometimes people make unfair choices," James began slowly. His voice was quiet, but each word was carefully thought out. He wanted his children to understand truth without scaring them. "The market told me I couldn't sell there anymore, even though I've been going there for 5 years. "But why?" Thomas asked, his 9-year-old mind trying to understand. "You have the best vegetables, everyone says so. Mrs. Williams always talks about your tomatoes." Emma knew, without James saying more, exactly what had happened. She had seen it before in her own life, working in London as a teacher. She had experienced it when they first moved to the farm, and some neighbors were not friendly, but she had hoped their small community had moved past such things. "They made a new rule," James explained, trying to keep his voice calm and strong for his children. "But the rule only applied to me. All the other farmers were allowed to stay." Lucy was old enough to understand. Her face grew angry. "That's not fair, that's wrong." "You're right, Lucy," James said. "It is wrong, but we have to decide how to respond to unfair things in life." Emma reached across the table and placed her hand on top of James's. Her wedding ring, simple and gold, caught the light from the lamp. "Do you remember what your grandfather Henry used to say?" she asked softly. James smiled for the first time that day. The memory of his grandfather always gave him strength. Henry. Thompson had worked on other people's farms his whole life, picking vegetables, caring for animals, getting up before sunrise and working until sunset. He had dreamed of owning his own piece of land, but never had enough money. Henry would tell James stories about the old days while they worked together in the garden. He used to say, "When one door closes, find another way," James repeated slowly. The words felt like medicine to his hurt heart. "Grandpa Henry never owned his own farm," Lucy said thoughtfully. "But you do, Dad. You made his dream come true. And nobody can take our farm away from us," Thomas added, his voice strong with the confidence only children have. They talked more over their dinner of soup and bread. Emma told stories about James's grandfather, how he had taught James everything about farming when James was just Thomas's age. They talked about the good customers at the market, like Emily, and Robert, who had tried to stand up for James. After the children went to bed, James couldn't sleep. He walked around the farmhouse, looking at the pictures on the walls, his grandfather as a young man, his parents on their wedding day, Lucy and Thomas as babies. He thought about his ancestors, the struggles they had faced, the courage it took to keep going. Emma found him sitting on the back porch, looking out at their fields in the darkness. The full moon made the vegetable rows look like silver ribbons. Across the land, she sat beside him quietly for a while before speaking. "James," she said, "you've been thinking hard. I can tell." "I've been thinking about not letting this beat me," James said slowly. "Margaret can keep me out of her market, but she can't keep me from being a farmer. She can't stop me from growing the best vegetables in Sussex." "What are you planning?" Emma asked, though she could see determination returning to his eyes. "I'm thinking about building something bigger than just a market stall," James said. "Something that can't be taken away. Something that might help other farmers who face the same problems." Emma smiled in the moonlight. This was the man she had fallen in love with. Someone who turned problems into possibilities, who faced unfairness with determination instead of anger. Inside the house, they could hear Lucy reading a book to Thomas, trying to help him fall asleep after the difficult day. The sound of their children's voices reminded them of what really mattered, not the market that had rejected James, but the family that loved him, the land that belonged to them, and the future they could still build together. That night, James finally lay down to sleep. He had already begun planning. Ideas swirled in his mind like seeds in the wind. He thought about direct selling, about reaching customers differently, about joining with other farmers who had been pushed aside. His grandfather's words echoed in his mind. "When one door closes, find another way." Tomorrow would be a new beginning. The market had closed its doors to him, but James Thompson was about to open doors that no one had imagined before. The next day, James called William Harris, a farmer who grew apples and pears 15 miles away. James had known William for years from other farmers' markets and agricultural shows. They had often shared trucks to save fuel and helped each other during harvest time. "William," James said into the phone, "I need to talk to you about something important. Can you meet me tomorrow?" The following morning, William arrived in his old red truck. They sat at the kitchen table drinking coffee while Emma made breakfast for the children. James explained what had happened at the market and his ideas for a new way of selling. William nodded slowly. "I've faced problems too," he admitted. "Last year they told me my produce wasn't right for the market. No real reason given. I suspected it was because I hired workers who didn't speak English perfectly." James grew excited. "So, what if we worked together? We could sell directly to customers without any markets in between." By the end of the week, 2 more farmers had joined their plan. Elizabeth Dawson raised chickens and sold eggs on a small farm near Dover. She had faced comments about being a single mother trying to run a business. Michael Turner grew herbs and flowers and had been told his setup looked too messy for the upscale market. On Sunday afternoon, all 4 farmers met at James's kitchen table. They spread out papers and notebooks, talking quickly but quietly so they wouldn't wake Thomas, who was napping upstairs. "We need a name," Elizabeth said, her pen hovering over her notepad. "Something that sounds like family," Michael suggested. "Something that shows we're working together," William added. Lucy, who had been reading in the corner, suddenly spoke up. "What about Heritage Fields? Because you're all keeping farming traditions alive." The adults looked at each other and smiled. The 12-year-old had found the perfect name. From her art supplies, Lucy drew their first logo, a simple picture of 4 fields meeting in the middle, each with different plants growing. That evening, after everyone had gone home, Emma set up her old laptop on the kitchen table. "I've been reading about online selling," she told James. "We need to make a website where people can order directly from us." Late into the night, James and Emma worked together. They took pictures of vegetables with Emma's phone camera. They wrote descriptions: sweet carrots grown in Sussex soil and fresh eggs from happy hens. Emma typed while James explained each product. Lucy appeared in her pajamas around 11 o'clock. "I couldn't sleep," she said. "What are you doing?" Building something important, James explained. A new way to sell our vegetables. Lucy climbed into Emma's lap. Can I help? Soon Lucy was suggesting improvements to her logo design. She showed her parents how to make the words bigger and brighter on the screen. Together, the family worked until nearly midnight, building something new. 2 weeks later, their website was ready. James remembered his grandfather Henry, who could barely read and write, and marveled at how technology could help small farmers reach more people. Elizabeth, who understood computers better than the others, had created email addresses for all of them. The morning after their website went live, James kept checking his email. Nothing came until almost lunchtime. Then suddenly there was a message. Hello, I would like to order 5 kilos of carrots and 3 kilos of potatoes. Can you deliver to London? James ran to Emma. We have our first order. From London. Soon, more. Emails arrived. A family in Manchester wanted organic eggs. A restaurant in Birmingham asked about regular vegetable deliveries. Word spread through social media as customers shared pictures of their fresh produce with the hashtag #OnHeritageFarms. The 4 farmers worked harder than ever before. They spent early mornings picking vegetables and packing boxes. They learned about shipping labels and postal codes. They took turns making deliveries to nearby towns. After a month, they had more orders than they could handle alone. James came up with a solution. In the nearby village, several people had lost their jobs when the local factory closed. James knew some of them from his children's school. Would you like to help us pack vegetables? James asked his friend David Brown, whose wife taught with Emma at the primary school. David's face lit up. I've been looking for work for 6 months. I'll help any way I can. Soon, 5 local workers were helping pack orders in James's barn. They sorted carrots, washed potatoes, and carefully arranged eggs. The extra workers meant they could take more orders and deliver even faster. Every morning at 8 o'clock, the team gathered in the barn. They drank tea together and planned the day's work. Sarah Bennett, another new worker, had lost her shop when the big supermarket opened. Now she managed the orders and helped with customer emails. I love this better than the shop, Sarah said one day. Here I know exactly where the food comes from and who grew it. Elizabeth arrived each morning with fresh eggs in her truck. You know, she said to James one Tuesday, we're not just selling vegetables, we're building a community. James thought about this often. The customers who wrote thank you emails, the workers who smiled as they packed their first orders, Williams, children learning to sort apples by size, Michael teaching the new workers about herbs. Every evening, after the day's work was done, James would walk through his fields. He touched the dark soil, feeling its coolness between his fingers. Sometimes he talked to his grandfather, telling him about the business they were building. Grandpa Henry, you should see it now, he would whisper to the wind. We're growing more than vegetables. We're growing opportunities. The tomato plants reached higher each day, their red fruits glowing in the late afternoon sun. The potato plants spread their green leaves wide, strong and healthy in rows across the field. Everything was growing, not just the vegetables, but the hope and the dreams of everyone working together. In 3 months, Heritage Fields had grown from 4 farmers' idea into a real business. They had stopped using their old market stalls completely. Now they sold everything online and through local delivery. They employed 8 people from the village, including 2 teenagers learning about business after school. One evening, James's phone rang. It was a reporter from the local newspaper. We've heard about Heritage Fields, the reporter said. People are talking about how you're changing the way farms sell their produce. Can we come for an interview? James smiled, thinking of his grandfather again. From being kicked out of the market to making local news, the journey had been difficult but worthwhile. He looked at Lucy's logo design on their business cards, remembering how a 12-year-old had named their company. Yes, James said to the reporter, we'd be happy to tell our story. The end, 2 years of hard work passed like turning pages in a thick book. Heritage Fields had grown from 4 farmers meeting around James's kitchen table to a busy business that people across England were talking about. The website Lucy designed had turned into something much bigger with professional help, but her original drawing still appeared on every package. One Tuesday morning in September, rain was falling gently on the fields when a fancy car drove up the farm's gravel road. A woman named Sophie stepped out, holding an umbrella and a notebook. She wore city clothes but smiled warmly as James approached. "I'm Sophie Richardson from the Guardian newspaper," she said. "I've heard remarkable things about Heritage Fields. Your customers rave about your vegetables, and I've heard your story involves more than just good produce." Sophie spent the entire day following James and the team. She watched them pick vegetables, pack orders, and talk with the local workers. She met Elizabeth sorting eggs, Michael bundling herbs, and William checking apples for ripeness. She even saw Lucy, now 14, helping with social media after school. "What made you start this?" Sophie asked James as they sat in the farmhouse kitchen drinking tea. James told her about the day at the market, about Margaret turning him away, about how unfairness had pushed him to create something new. He spoke about his grandfather Henry, who had dreamed of owning land all his life. "We wanted to prove that small farmers matter," James explained, "that good food can reach people directly, without judgment or discrimination." 2 months later, people all over Britain opened their Sunday newspapers to read Sophie's article. How 4 farmers beat the system and created a food revolution. The article showed pictures of the farmhouse, the workers, and James's family. So it told the whole story, from rejection to success. The morning after the article appeared, James's phone rang non-stop. Local TV news wanted interviews. Other newspapers called for follow-up stories. But the call that surprised James most came on a Wednesday morning. "Hello, James Thompson? This is David Miller," said a confident voice with a London accent. James nearly dropped the phone. David Miller was the famous chef everyone watched on television. He owned 3 restaurants in London and was known for demanding only the best ingredients. "I read Sophie's article," Chef Miller continued. "Your vegetables sound exceptional. I'd like to use them in my restaurants. Can you supply regularly?" James felt sweat on his forehead. This was exactly what they needed to grow, but could they handle such a big order? He promised to call back after discussing with his partners. That evening, the 4 farmers gathered in James's expanded farm office. They had moved operations from the kitchen to a converted barn, where computers and filing cabinets now stood, beside crates of vegetables. "Chef Miller's restaurants serve hundreds of meals daily," Michael pointed out. "We'd need 5 times our current production." "But think of the opportunity," William added. "If our vegetables are used in famous restaurants, more people will notice. Other restaurants might order from us too." Elizabeth nodded. "We'd need more farmers to join us, though. We can't grow that much ourselves." They decided to accept Chef Miller's offer, but to expand carefully. They contacted small farmers they knew who struggled to find markets for their produce. Soon 5 new farmers had joined Heritage Fields: a dairy farmer, 2 vegetable growers, a fruit farmer, and someone who raised organic chickens. Over the following year, Heritage Fields expanded beyond anyone's imagination. The 4 original farmers became partners who managed the growing business. They rented an old warehouse in the nearby town of Lewes and converted it into a packing centre. Every morning, trucks arrived from participating farms across southeast England. Workers sorted vegetables by quality, packed them in boxes marked with the Heritage Fields logo, and loaded them onto delivery trucks. The warehouse hummed with activity as people called out orders, operated packing machines, and checked delivery schedules. James walked through the warehouse every day, making sure he knew each worker's name. He hired people from the local community who had struggled to find jobs. Mike Wilson, who had lost his factory job 2 years earlier, now managed the packing floor. Jennifer Adams, a single mother who had been unemployed for months, became the customer service manager. "You gave me more than a job," Jennifer told James one day. "You gave me back my confidence." By the spring of 2015, Heritage Fields was working with 25 farms across England and Wales. Their vegetables appeared in Chef Miller's restaurants and 15 other restaurants across London. Supermarkets began calling. The biggest call came on a sunny April. "Morning. This is Peter from Tesco," the voice said. "We'd like to stock your products in our stores, starting with 50 locations, possibly expanding to 200 by next year." James felt dizzy as he listened. Tesco was Britain's largest supermarket chain. This would mean supplying millions of customers. He made arrangements to discuss details and immediately called the other farmers. "This could change everything," James said at their emergency meeting. "But we need to be careful. We started this to help small farmers, not to become another big company that forgets its roots. They discussed options for hours. Could they handle such massive orders? Would they need to hire managers who understood big business? Most importantly, could they maintain their commitment to quality and community? Remember why we started, Emma reminded them. We wanted to create fairness for small farmers. Now we have a chance to help even more people. The farmers agreed to enter negotiations with Tesco, but with conditions. They would maintain their quality standards. They would continue supporting small farmers. They would keep most decisions in the hands of farmers, not business managers. Contracts were signed. Orders poured in. The warehouse expanded to 3 times its original size. Heritage Fields now employed 40 local workers and supported 55 farms across England and Wales. Special sections in Tesco stores featured their produce with signs reading, "Supporting British Small Farmers." One evening in late summer, James and Emma sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink above their fields. The farm had grown from 10 acres to 50. The original vegetable beds were now managed by new farm hands, while James focused on business management. "My grandfather could never have imagined this," James said, his voice full of wonder. "From working other people's fields to having our produce in supermarkets across the country." Emma took his hand. "Henry planted more than vegetables," she said. "He planted dreams in you. And now those dreams are feeding thousands of families." Inside the house, Lucy was helping Thomas with his homework. Their daughter had just started college, studying business and agriculture. Thomas, now 11, still proclaimed he would be a farmer like his father. The old oak tree by the house rustled, its leaves in the evening breeze. Somewhere, James's grandfather Henry seemed to be smiling, seeing how one man's dream of owning land had grown into a movement that was changing how Britain thought about farming and food. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new deliveries, new farmers joining their network. But tonight, James felt grateful for the journey from that painful day at the market to this moment of success that benefited so many. The end. 3 years had passed since that terrible morning when James had been forced to leave the Brighton Farmers Market. Now, on a warm spring morning, he stood in his spacious office at Heritage Fields headquarters. The room had large windows overlooking the fields where his vegetables still grew, though the farm had expanded far beyond what his grandfather Henry could have dreamed. James held a letter in his hands. The envelope was simple, white, with neat handwriting. It came from Margaret, the former market manager who had ordered him to leave 3 years ago. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it. Inside were 2 pages filled with Margaret's careful writing. She explained how she had struggled with guilt ever since that day. She had lost her job as market manager 6 months after James left, when other vendors complained about her unfair treatment. She had spent time thinking about her actions and realized how wrong she had been. "I was afraid of change," Margaret had written. "I thought keeping things the same would preserve our community. Instead, I hurt someone who was making our community better. I'm deeply sorry, James. I hope you can forgive me." James read the letter twice, sitting quietly in his leather chair. He had expected to feel anger or satisfaction, but instead, a deep peace settled over him. Margaret's apology didn't change the past, but it showed that people could learn and grow just like his vegetables in the fields outside. That afternoon, James gathered his management team, William, Elizabeth, Michael, and 2 new farmers who had joined as partners. They sat around the large wooden table in the conference room where important decisions were made. "I have an idea," James said. "We should create a fund to help new farmers get started." Elizabeth leaned forward. "That's wonderful. Many young farmers face the same barriers we did: lack of money for equipment, not knowing how to reach customers." "We could call it the Second Chance Fund," William suggested. "Like the second chance we gave ourselves when the markets shut. Us out." The idea grew as they talked. They would provide low-interest loans for farming equipment. They would offer free training on organic farming methods. Every month, they would hold workshops at their headquarters to teach new farmers about business, marketing, and online sales. "My grandfather never had these opportunities," James said, thinking of Henry working his whole life without owning his own land. "We can make sure others don't face those same struggles." The Second Chance Fund launched 3 months later. Its first recipient was a young woman named Sarah who wanted to grow herbs but couldn't afford a greenhouse. The second was an immigrant farmer who needed help understanding English farming regulations. Every weekend, James personally led workshops in the warehouse's meeting room. He taught about soil quality, crop rotation, and pest control. Emma helped with lessons on bookkeeping and customer service. Sometimes James's parents came to share stories of how farming had changed over the generations. One Saturday morning, exactly 3 years after being asked to leave the Brighton Farmers Market, James decided to return. He didn't go to sell vegetables. His products were already available in hundreds of Tesco stores across Britain. He went to visit, to see the place where his journey had taken a dramatic turn. When he arrived at the market, many vendors recognized him immediately. His success had been featured in newspapers and on television. Some waved and called out greetings. Others looked surprised to see him. James walked slowly through the familiar rows of stalls. The smells of fresh bread, ripe fruit, and cut flowers brought back memories. He saw new faces among the vendors and noticed some stalls had different products than before. Then he spotted Margaret. She stood near her old office building, looking nervous. When their eyes met, she walked toward him with hesitant steps. Her face showed worry and regret. "James," she said quietly, "I didn't know you would come today. I sent a letter to your farm." "I received it," James replied calmly. "Thank you for being honest about what happened." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "I was wrong to ask you to leave. I denied the market the best vegetables we had. I denied other farmers the benefit of your example. I'm so sorry." James felt his 12-year-old son Thomas stand closer to him. The boy had asked to come along, curious about the place his father talked about sometimes. Thomas had grown tall, in 3 years, and his face showed the determination James recognized from his own father and grandfather. "We all make mistakes," James told Margaret. The words came easily, without bitterness. "What matters is learning from them and doing better." Margaret wiped her eyes. "You've done amazing things. The whole town talks about Heritage Fields. You've hired so many people. You've changed how we think about farming." James looked at Thomas, then back at Margaret. "Actually, I need to thank you. Without that day 3 years ago, I might never have pushed myself to create something bigger." As they talked, James noticed people gathering around Heritage Fields. Products at several stalls. His vegetables were now sold by vendors who had once watched him leave in humiliation. Customers examined the bright Heritage logo, Lucy's design, now recognized across England. "Dad," Thomas interrupted, tugging on James's sleeve. "I didn't know our vegetables were sold here." James smiled at his son. He remembered being Thomas's age, following his grandfather through gardens, learning to tell good soil from bad, understanding that farming was more than just growing food. It was about growing communities. "Yes, they are," James answered. "And someday, if you choose to be a farmer too, they'll be yours." They said goodbye to Margaret, who promised to visit the farm and see their operation. As James and Thomas walked back to their car, the boy asked questions about the market, about business, about how their products reached so many places. "Dad," Thomas said as they were leaving, "what do we do next?" James thought about the Second Chance Fund helping new farmers. He thought about the 55 farms now working with Heritage Fields. He thought about the hundreds of employees, many of whom had struggled before finding work with them. He thought about the future. Electric vehicles for deliveries, solar panels for the warehouses, teaching young people about sustainable farming. Looking up at the bright blue sky above the market where his journey had taken such a difficult turn, James felt clarity about their purpose. "We make sure every farmer has a chance to grow just like we did. We keep opening doors that others try to close." Thomas nodded seriously, already understanding the weight of responsibility and opportunity. Together they walked toward the parking lot where their car waited, father and son, carrying the legacy of Henry's dreams forward into a future where farming meant not just growing food, but growing fairness, community, and hope for everyone. The market bustled behind them as Heritage Fields vegetables continued to sell. In every corner of England, families were preparing meals with those same vegetables. fresh organic produce grown by farmers who now had a fair chance to succeed. Margaret stood watching them leave, feeling the weight of her past mistake lifted, slightly by forgiveness. She understood now that fairness wasn't about keeping things the same, but about making sure everyone had room to grow. As James drove away from the market for what he knew would not be the last time, he felt grateful for difficult moments that had pushed him to create something better. The road ahead held new challenges, new farmers to help and new dreams to fulfill. But this time he wouldn't face them alone. He faced them with a community of farmers, workers, and believers in second chances. Heritage Fields continued to grow not just as a business, but as a symbol of what could happen when one person refused to let unfairness win, when one family decided to turn pain into purpose, and when one community chose to lift others instead of pushing them down. The story of James Thompson would be told in farming communities for years to come, not just as a story of business success, but as a reminder that the best seeds we plant are the ones of opportunity, fairness, and hope for others. The End Universal Message. When faced with injustice, respond with creativity and determination. Build systems that prevent others from experiencing the same unfairness. Turn your struggles into strength for others.